I was standing alone, my sneakers almost glued to the edge of the worn wooden dock, staring into the deep blue of the lake that had been a part of my life since I was a kid now, at 29, with my dark shoulder-length hair fluttering in the wind and a physique that was more athletic from years of swimming than anything else. I felt like a stranger to myself. I'm not tall, not particularly striking, just another face you'd pass without a second glance. But here in this moment, it was just me and a choice that could change everything. Growing up, I was always the careful one, never stepping too far out of line, always measuring twice before I cut, once my decisions were calculated safe. So why now? Why this sudden urge to throw it all to the wind? The internal conflict was palpable, as if the steady beat of my heart was in direct contention with the racing thoughts in my mind. The more I thought about stepping into the cold, unknown depths below, the more it seemed like madness. But wasn't life about more than just playing it safe? I'd spent nights thinking about this jump, not just the physical act of diving into the lake, but what it represented. The lake was familiar, but the act was foreign each night. The same thoughts circled like vultures. What if this changed the way I saw myself? What if I wasn't who I thought I was with every ticking second? The battle between fear and desire grew fiercer. My fear was a tangible, heavy thing, almost suffocating. But my desire, it was a wild, whispering thing, urging me to just let go. The turning point came unexpectedly. As I stood there wrestling with my thoughts, a sudden sharp memory cut through the noise. I remembered my father, his laughter echoing across this very lake, urging a much younger me to jump in. He never knew fear in the way I did. Or maybe he did, and he chose to face it head on. It wasn't about the jump. It wasn't about the thrill. It was about confronting the very thing that held me back from living fully. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. And so I closed my eyes, inhaled a lung full of the brisk morning air, and made a decision. My heart thundered against my ribs. Fierce and unyielding, I bent my knees, every muscle coiled like a spring, and then I leaped. The air rushed past me, and in that brief flight, there was nothing else that mattered, no fears, no doubts, just the sheer, unadulterated essence of freedom when I surfaced. Gasping and laughing, the world hadn't changed, but something within me had shifted. I had faced my fear, not because it was expected or required, irked, but because I knew I needed to. The water around me was the same shade of blue, the trees as lush and green as they'd always been. But I was different. I had discovered a courage I never knew I had, and while the future was as uncertain as ever, I knew I was ready for whatever it held, armed with a new understanding of who I was, and more importantly, who I could be. The deeper I delved into my own thoughts, the more they seemed to entangle, blurring the lines between reason and impulse. Each second felt heavier as I questioned myself over and over. Should I step beyond the boundaries I'd drawn around my life? My safe haven had become a cage, and the key to freedom was a simple decision that seemed monumental. Could I really break free from my own restrictions for days? The same thought haunted me relentlessly. What if I'm making a mistake? The comfort of predictability had always been my ally, shielding me from the unpredictable storms of life. But now, as I sat in my small, cluttered apartment surrounded by the familiarity of my possessions, I felt an overwhelming claustrophobia. It was as if the walls were urging me to make a move, to step into a realm I had never dared explore. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the passage of time with a relentless precision. With each tick, the struggle within me intensified. I paced back and forth, my footsteps a dull echo in the quiet room. Why was this so hard? It was just a decision. Just one step in a new direction, but every fiber of my being resisted fearing the unknown, yet desiring it with an intensity that surprised me. As I sat down again, a sense of exhaustion washed over me. The mental battle was draining, leaving me tired and confused. But in that moment of weariness, a spark of clarity emerged. It wasn't just about changing my routine or making a new choice. It was about confronting the part of me that clung to security like a lifeline. Did I want to live my life in the shadows of what could be, always wondering, always waiting? No, I couldn't let that happen. I stood up. My resolve, hardening the fear of making a mistake, was no longer enough to hold me back. I had to try, had to see what was on the other side of my self-imposed limitations with a newfound determination. I grabbed my coat and keys. It was time to step out to face the world with all its uncertainties. The decision was made. I was ready to embrace whatever came my way, ready to learn to grow, to truly live. And with that, I stepped out the door, leaving behind the echoes of what had been stepping boldly towards what could be. As the days passed, my decision loomed over me like a shadow, both daunting and exhilarating. I realized it wasn't just about making a choice. It was about embracing the entirety of who I could become each morning as I faced myself in the mirror. A different reflection seemed to stare back. Was I the same person who was too frightened to change? Or was I becoming someone braver, stronger? The internal debate was intense. Can I really do this? I would ask myself the question, echoing in the quiet of my small kitchen where I sipped my morning coffee. The same thoughts circled, relentless and unyielding, but with each repetition, they lost some of their power. Fear began to transform into something else, a fierce desire to not just float, but to swim, to dive into the depths of life. One evening, as I sat alone on my porch watching the sun set in a blaze of oranges and purples, the moment of clarity I had been unconsciously waiting for washed over me. It wasn't fear that was holding me back. It was the comfort of my current life. But comfort without fulfillment is like a shell, without the sea, a hollow echoing space. Suddenly the decision was clear, as if the setting sun had aligned everything within me. I have to do this, I whispered to the cooling breeze, my voice steady. It was no longer a question of if, but when. The realization that I had the power to change my own narrative empowered me. It was liberating, the knowledge that the of my life were firmly in my hands. The next morning, I took decisive action with each step forward. My heart pounded with a mixture of nerves and excitement. There was no dramatic confrontation, no external challenges to overcome. The battle was within. And as I moved forward, it felt as though I was shedding an old skin, leaving behind the constraints of my former self. When I finally made the change, the world around me didn't shift. There were no fireworks, no spontaneous applause, but internally everything had shifted. I felt a profound peace, an inner alignment that I had never experienced before. I had faced my deepest fears and emerged not unscathed, but undeniably stronger. Looking back, I realized that this journey was never about the fear of the unknown, but about my capacity to confront it. The choice to change had been a path to self-discovery, revealing strengths I had never acknowledged. I had not only survived the challenge, I had thrived, and that realization was a quiet victory celebrated not by the world, but by my soul, now free to explore the vast horizons of life. The day of my decision approached. The tension inside me built like a storm. With every breath, I could feel the weight of my impending choice pressing down on me with a force that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Can I really do this? This question played on repeat in my mind, a relentless echo that filled every quiet moment. The familiarity of my life up to that point had become a PR of sorts, one that I had willingly entered but now desperately wished to escape. I spent that morning in solitude, wandering through the familiar paths of the park near my house. The trees stood tall and steady, unaffected by the turmoil within me. Their quiet strength was a contrast to my inner chaos, and I found myself envying their rootedness. Why can't I just be content with what I have? I pondered, but even as the question formed, I knew the answer. Contentment without fulfillment is just another form of stagnation, and I was already suffocating. The climax of my journey came unexpectedly, during a simple, solitary moment on a park bench, as I watched families and joggers pass by, each absorbed in their own worlds. A sudden burst of clarity struck me. It was as if the noise in my head had quieted, and I could hear myself think clearly. For the first time in weeks, I need to do this. I owe it to myself. I realized that my fear of change was less about the actual risks it involved, and more about confronting who I would become once I stepped out of my comfort zone. The decision once made felt like a physical release. I stood up from the bench, my legs a little shaky, but my heart surging with a newfound resolve. Walking back home, I felt lighter, as though I had left an invisible burden on that park bench. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that, but for the first time, the uncertainty seemed less like a threat and more like a promise. Upon returning home, I made the necessary calls. My voice steady and sure, my hands surprisingly calm with each word spoken, with each step taken towards this new chapter. The reality of my choice sank in. I was doing this. I was actually making it happen that night. As I lay in bed, a profound sense of peace enveloped me. I had faced my deepest fears, and not only confronted them, but had also embraced them. There was no grand celebration, no external acknowledgement of my courage. But there didn't need to be. I knew what I had overcome, and that knowledge was enough. I had stepped into the unknown, driven by a force from within, and no matter what the future held, I had already succeeded in changing the one thing that truly mattered: myself. After taking the leap and making the choice to embrace change, the aftermath was quieter than I expected. The dramatic shift I had imagined turned out to be a series of small, almost imperceptible changes that would themselves into the fabric of my daily life each morning. As I woke up, there was a subtle but undeniable newness in my perspective, a slight shift in how I viewed my world and myself within it. I found myself experimenting with choices I would have previously avoided, whether it was trying a new hobby or reaching out to an old friend. Each decision felt like a small victory, a test date to the new path I had chosen. Is this really me? I often wondered, amazed at how natural it felt to step out of my once comfortable patterns. The doubt was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it no longer held the power at once. As weeks turned into months, the realization that I had truly changed became more evident. I was no longer the person who stood paralyzed at the edge of decision. Now I was someone who embraced the possibility of failure as much as success. It was not about being fearless, but about recognizing that the essence of living lies in moving forward even when the path is unclear. Reflecting on my journey one evening while watching the sunset from my kitchen window, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The changes I had made weren't just about altering my routines or expanding my social circle. They were about deeper self-discovery and acceptance. I had learned to listen to my inner voice, to trust it, and to let it guide me. This was not the end of my journey, but a new beginning. The peace that came from this realization was profound. I understood that true growth isn't always marked by big external milestones, but often happens in quiet moments of choice. My life hadn't dramatically transformed overnight, but I had evolved, and that was what truly mattered. As I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons of this experience. That change is not just something that happens to us, but something we can actively choose day by day, moment by moment. If you enjoyed my story, please like this video and subscribe my channel for more stories.